you had a chance to get a nice stretch break and check out our event sponsor and partner virtual exhibitor booths, which are up and running. Before we get started on this panel, we're going to have a short video that spotlights climate resiliency in Palm Beach County. We will be hearing from Commissioner Dave Kerner. Enjoy.
A climate resilient community to me is one that starts off with an understanding, common knowledge that we have a crisis on our hands and that it's not something that needs to be attended to 10 years from now or 15 or 25 years from now. The impacts and effects of it are here already. And so it starts with a community that recognizes that, and it starts with a community that also elects leaders that are willing to take on those challenges on behalf of their constituents, on behalf of our neighbors, our friends, our residents and relatives. And I think Palm Beach County meets both of those. Both we recognize it and we're taking actions both locally and through our elected leaders, both here and in Washington, to recognize and combat the climate crisis. It can be something as simple as the many relationships and working groups and compacts that we have with other units of government, whether here locally or throughout the state of Florida. It could be our focus on having a sustainable fleet. We have 6,000 people that work for this county. And then it's a much broader understanding and long-term commitment to combating the crisis. And I'm talking about reinforcing our commitment to clean water, and I'm talking about looking at how years and years of sea level rise will impact not just our inhabitability of the county, but our ability to live here at all, and not just on the coastal areas, but how do those effects, how does the rising waters affect our ability to ensure our homes, live in our homes, and ensure that we can continue to do that in a safe way in the future. Thank you to the younger generations. Thank you for your advocacy, for your passion, for your recognition that if the younger generations and the youth of this world don't step up now as they are, that we will never get through this without their assistance, without their recognition and passion. The second thing is that I'm inspired by them because they've begun to do that. We know that this didn't happen overnight and that it's not going to be an overnight solution. But I think they recognize that if they're not a significant part of the dialogue and decision making, that there will not be an earth to inhabit. And for that, I'm very thankful for their passion. So I would encourage you to come to Palm Beach County, see the diversity of Palm Beach County, both ecologically and in the human spirit. Go to Okehilly Park, go to the Boynton Inlet if you get a chance, a really very cool, chill place to hang out and see a lot of what we have to offer here in Palm Beach County.
Thank you, Commissioner Kerner. Next, we're going to dive into another great panel, Resiliency from the State, a conversation with Florida legislators. In this panel, we'll hear from state representatives on how Tallahassee is working with local governments to plan for a climate resilient future. This panel will be moderated by Ed Chase, Palm Beach County's Director of Intergovernmental Affairs and Community Engagement. Ed, I'll turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Megan, thank you so much. It's good to be with you this afternoon. This is Resiliency from the State, a conversation with state legislators. So we are in the coveted time slot immediately following the in memoriam section of the conference, which is awesome. So for Senator Berman and Representative Posada Cabrera, let me apologize, firstly, for whatever I did to whomever it was that got us in this time slot. It could have been anything, but we will move forward. So if you are an attendee watching, thank you for sticking with us towards the end of the afternoon. But if you are an attendee, you need to know this. This is the most important session over this 2-day conference. All right, let's just go with that. So the reason is this. This is the session that explains how things actually get done in Tallahassee. So let's meet our panelists today. We have two of the best from South Florida who are the most knowledgeable on these issues. First, I'd like to introduce Senator Lori Berman. Senator Berman represents District 31 in the Florida Senate, and she represents southeastern Palm Beach County, kind of runs from the city of Lake Worth Beach down to the Boca Raton line, and then from the Turnpike all the way to the ocean. She was elected to the House back in 2010 and served a full 8 years in the House. And then in 2018, she won a special election to the Senate and has been there ever since. So one of the committees of special note to this conference on which she serves is the Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture, Environmental, and General Government. Senator Berman, welcome. Glad to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here with all of you. And thank you for organizing this really important conference to the organizers. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We're glad you could join us. Also with us today is Representative Demi Posada Cabrera. She represents District number 114 in the Florida House of Representatives. So she covers sort of Biscayne Bay and South Miami-Dade County from Cutler Bay kind of up to Pinecrest. And then she has an interesting swath that kind of runs up kind of to the side east and west of Red Road from the airport all the way down to Biscayne Bay. She was elected to the House in 2020, but I must warn you, do not let that relatively short tenure fool you. She is fully engaged and fully knowledgeable on these issues. As such, the House leadership appointed her to be the vice chair of the Agriculture and Natural Resources Appropriations Subcommittee in the House in her very first year as a representative. And she also serves on the Environment, Agriculture, and Flooding Subcommittee in the House. Representative Posada Cabrera, welcome. We're glad you're with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here today.
Well, good. So I will start off asking just a few questions, and then we will turn it over to maybe some attendee questions as they come in throughout the session today. So let's just start kind of big picture wise. We know climate change affects all of Florida, but it does affect all of Florida in different ways. So how are the state legislators working together on climate resilience issues? And Senator Berman, I will have you kick this off.
Thank you so much for that question. A lot of times, especially before in the prior administration, there wasn't a lot of discussion and there wasn't a lot of collaboration between Democrats and Republicans on climate change and sea level rise and resiliency. But in this new administration, there has been a lot of collaboration, which is fantastic because the environment affects all of us and it's a nonpartisan issue and it should be something that we should all be working on together. So the legislature, because we have had some assistance from the federal government, we have a pretty flush budget. And what we've been able to do is really put a lot of money into this issue. Last year, we put $12.5 million for Resilient Coastlines initiatives, $29 million for Resilient Florida Grant Program, $500 million in federal funds for implementation of statewide resilience projects, and many of those projects were just announced, so that's exciting, and $100 million for the Resilient Florida Grant Program. We all see that in our communities, especially in South Florida, we continue to see sunny day flooding, and as well as in Miami a couple of weeks ago, we saw pretty significant rainy day flooding. So it's something that we all need to be working on together. And because there is $100 billion state budget, we are putting millions and millions of dollars, more than $1 billion into this. And I'm really proud of that. And I think it shows that we're starting to prioritize this area.
Representative Posada Cabrera, can you talk a little bit about how legislators are kind of working together on this issue?
Definitely. The senator is right. Sea level rise doesn't care which zip code you live in, doesn't care which party you belong to. This is a Floridian issue and it affects us all, whether you're in a coastal community or an inland community. And that's why I'm really excited about the work that the legislature, did this past session. I had the opportunity to sponsor House Bill 7019, which created the first ever statewide flooding and sea level rise resilience program. And part of that bill also included, who I know unfortunately couldn't be here today with us, Senator Robin Bartleman's legislation. So, we really made an effort to make sure that we were all working together to get the best possible piece of legislation forward. And like I said, this is the first time we've ever done anything like this. So I'm sure we're going to have to come back and do some more work because, the biggest room is the room for improvement. And we want to make sure that Florida is always ready. And unfortunately, we've probably been behind the curve on this issue, but better late than never. And I'm excited for what this piece of legislation will bring forward. Part of that legislation was to allocate $100 million annually minimum for flooding and sea level rise resiliency projects. I think we'll go into that a little bit more later about how this money is going to go directly back into our local communities.
Thank you for that. I want to get back to 7019 a little, in just a few minutes. But I wanted to ask you, so how you mentioned local governments. How's the Florida legislature working with local governments directly to address climate change and kind of build going forward resilient Florida communities?
Definitely. So our local governments can apply directly to DEP for funding for resiliency projects. And we wanted to make sure that, financially disadvantaged communities weren't at a disadvantage because originally part of the piece of legislation was a 50-50 match. As we were going through the committee process, we did an amendment to make sure that those financially disadvantaged communities that couldn't meet that 50-50 match were still able to access these funds. We also allowed the opportunity for regional coalitions to form to help and also apply for funding for these local communities. Sometimes communities don't have the resources to do it themselves. And there are great coalitions like the Southeast Florida Regional Compact who can help assist with that and, work with DEP directly to bring those funds into our communities.
Senator Berman, do you want to talk a little bit about how we're trying to work with local communities and going forward?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. And I, appreciate Representative Cabrera's comments. And, DEP is starting to really work with our local communities. So as for Miami-Dade and Palm Beach, Broward, Palm Beach, and Miami-Dade just got awarded over $140 million over the next 3 years for their projects. So that money will really be a lifeline for our communities to be able to address sea level rise and flooding, but it can also be used for adaptation and mitigation projects. So I think that that's a really good area that we're working with the local governments. I am a little concerned. We have passed some preemption bills which prevent the local governments from doing things. Last year, there was a bill that preempts local governments from making decisions on energy sourcing. So no local government can have their own decision about if they wanted to have net carbon neutrality. So I would like to see the legislature back off on some of those issues, but I'm happy to see that we are giving money for local governments for grants so that they can work because they know what's the priorities in their communities.
I'd like to talk to you both about some legislative accomplishments on resilience that you're proud of. And Representative Posada Cabrera, you mentioned House Bill 7019 that you co-sponsored last year. From looking at that bill and from where the Florida House started and where that bill started maybe a few years ago and where that bill ended up, it's as if the House went from first gear to fifth gear in a matter of a year, which was amazing. So I was hoping you might talk a little bit about the process of getting such a comprehensive bill through what has in the past been maybe a little bit of an apprehensive House of Representatives.
Yeah, definitely. So, like you said, I just got here last year in November, so I can't take the credit for a lot of the work that, was already being done. And, especially from individuals or compacts, like the Southeast Florida Regional Compact, who were already starting that groundwork, or we saw communities like Monroe County who were already ahead of the game on these issues because we weren't tackling them from a statewide level. I think that we're fortunate that we had the leadership that we have right now, in the House and in the Senate and, statewide, working together to finally tackle this long overdue issue. And, you saw it from both sides of the aisle. Like I said that, Representative Robin Bartleman had been, really trying to tackle this issue in the Florida House, and she had filed a bill, and we included it in the large package that we put forward that eventually passed.
And Senator Berman, part of that bill was actually your bill last year, which was your bill 1252 about the kind of identifying and planning ahead on a 50-year or longer period. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of that idea and how you were able to work that into the larger bill?
Sure. So that was the bill that Robin Bartleman sponsored, which is exciting. I was the Senate sponsor of that bill. And we work together. And the really interesting part about that bill, when we talk about climate change and sea level rise, everybody thinks about US 1 and the areas near the coast. But this bill actually said that we want to look at what's going on inland too, and we want to make some preparation for our inland communities where we're having issues with not sea level rise, but with water rising. And we did it saying that the local governments need to look at resilient inland resilience on a 50-year planning period so that we can start to plan ahead for that. So I'm really proud of that bill and happy that it made it into the big package. I've also done a lot of legislation over the years on issues regarding renewable energy. I was the sponsor of a constitutional amendment that passed in the state of Florida that said that you can have solar panels on commercial properties and it won't change your property valuation. So I think we need to look at renewable energy sources. And I have quite a few bills this year also on the issue of solar. One allowing educational facilities to use solar. I think that those are important things, and I'm proud of the legislation, the way we're moving the legislature more along into the renewable energy future also.
Well, thank you both for your work on that bill. We certainly hope that it has the results that we intend. We're looking forward to that. So as we kind of look forward to building on that, and as Representative Posada Cabrera, maybe a few fixes and adjustments are bound to happen. What are the biggest hurdles that we face as a state in preparing for the impacts of climate change that we're trying to address here? And Senator Berman, I'll kind of start with you. How do we look at that as on a statewide issue to prepare?
I worry that the biggest hurdle that we face is that we're addressing resilience, which is fantastic, but we're not addressing the source of the problem. And we need to really look at what the source of the problem is. A pound of cure, preparate. We need to be preparing so it doesn't cost us as much on the back end. I brought bills in the legislature saying that we have to have renewable energy by a certain goal and a certain date. And I'd like to see some of that happen. We also have in terms of a very specific issue that I'd like to see us address, and that's going to be a problem. It's our drainage canals. Right now, because the Atlantic Ocean is at a higher elevation, it makes it harder for the water management districts to sweep the water from the drainage canals into the ocean. And we've got to address that because, water quality is certainly important, and we can't have saltwater intrusion, which is a very, very serious problem. So, we've got big hurdles ahead of us in the state to address, but we're starting to address them. And this bill last year was a good start, but got a lot of work to do still.
Representative Posada Cabrera, can you want to talk a little bit maybe about the hurdles that you foresee in moving this forward?
I think one of the hurdles is that we really didn't know what we were dealing with, because we've never done anything like this as a state, because we were kind of behind, on this issue. Now, with doing a statewide assessment, we'll really be able to look at more of where we're actually at and what needs our communities have. And as you mentioned before, no community is the same. The East Coast is not the same as the West Coast or the Panhandle. Our inland communities are different than our coastal communities. So, each year DEP has to submit annually to the legislature, to the cabinet, a 3-year plan. So that way we're always looking into the future, and maybe we get to a point where it needs to be more in the future. But we also created the Florida Flood Hub for research, which will be part of USS St. Pete campus, right there on the water. So I'm excited to see what the Florida Flood Hub, Research Institute will bring forward for our state, and help us become leaders in sea level rise.
So about 150 of the participants in our conference over today and tomorrow are students, either high school students or college students. So, Representative Sedekberg, I wanted to kind of start with you and ask you, what kind of advice do you have for youth who are looking to make an impact on climate resiliency activities in Florida? I mean, what can they do, and how best can they do it?
Well, one of the first things that they're doing is joining something like this. I think that is amazing, and gives us a lot of hope for the future of what's to come for future generations. I think getting involved, as you see that what happens on the state level can affect our daily life more than what's happening in DC. So whether you're getting involved in your local community, getting involved on the state level, volunteering, interning, working, with a compact like this one, I think that's so important, just trying to help innovate or figure out a way to make sure that, our leaders throughout our communities, throughout our state, and, hopefully eventually throughout the country are making sure that this issue is a priority. And hopefully we have some, future leaders on here as well.
Senator Berman, you want to address kind of how our youth can get involved here?
Sure, absolutely. And I agree. I think it's amazing that they're part of this conference and that they're already here. And we heard from Mayor Dave Kerner from Palm Beach, and he said he applauds them for their activism and being involved. And we as leaders need to recognize that and bring them into the conversation. It's really important that their viewpoints and are heard by us, and we need to develop them as leaders. It would be great if we had more professional development and scholarships for youth so that they can understand about what's going on with climate change. And we need to work together internationally. We've seen some young people from different areas of the world get involved, and we need to encourage that, and we need to all be continuing this dialogue. We talk about this. I want to make sure that my children have the same kind of opportunities and the same environment that I grew up in. And so it's really imperative that you as the youth make that known and tell everybody this is our planet, and we've got to make sure and protect it. So thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for being here on this call, but stay involved. Come to Tallahassee, raise your voices, study this issue, and let everyone know that this is if not your number one priority, a real strong priority for you.
I'm looking at some of the questions, and it kind of matches one of the questions that I planned to ask you, and it was regarding the federal government's infrastructure bill. So that included a large amount of money for climate resilience. How do you think the state can either plan ahead or utilize these funds and make sure that they're spent correctly and passed down correctly to the local governments for their use? Senator Berman, I'll start with you.
Sure. So you need to look at what's in the bill, and it's an amazing bill. There's so many great things in there. There's $21 billion to clean polluted environments. There's $55 billion to protecting clean drinking water. I mean, we have a issue here in Florida, even in our schools. Some of our schools have lead in the drinking water. So that's great that there's going to be money so that we can address clean drinking water. $65 billion to prepare and protect the grid. We don't talk too much about it, but the electrical grid is, I mean, we don't have the same issues that they just experienced in Texas, but the electrical grid needs to be, we need to make sure that it's fortified and that nobody can do anything that would address our electricity. 39 billion for expanding public transit programs, and money for electric vehicle charging stations, which is something that I'm on the transportation committee in Tallahassee, and we are discussing that. It will happen here in our state. We are putting more electric vehicle charging stations. So the federal money is transformative. I think it will be a game changer for the state of Florida. A lot of the money comes with specific requirements about how it has to be used. We haven't seen a lot of those requirements yet. We anticipate they will be coming out. Some of them will be out in time for session. Some of them will be after session. So we are going to make sure that we use that money because unfortunately, Florida is a donor state, and we want to make sure that everything that we give to the federal government comes back to us here in Florida.
Thank you. I think we might have lost Ed for a moment, so I'll ask Representative Brusada Cabrera if you'd like to comment on that as well.
No, definitely. There are a lot of funds out there for, specific needs for our community. And I think that, sometimes our communities just, we have to make sure that we're being aggressive in, trying to access those funds and working with DEP and working with the various departments to make sure that we're bringing as much back into our communities. I know, DEP has their work cut out for them because we created this new program and they had to hire about 20 new employees to kind of figure out this issue. So, right now, let's, work together with them. They're there to ask or answer any questions that we may have about the application process, about bringing those funds into our community. But, we always have to make sure that we're on top of, applying for them. And I think that's why things like the Southeast Florida Regional Compact are great organizations to, help us and help assist our communities in accessing these things.
Wonderful, thank you. Kind of shifting topics, one of our audience members asked about, from the healthcare perspective, they were saying, they're in the industry and that they know that healthcare facilities are working towards greenhouse gas emissions and creating sustainable healthcare. Do you know of anything in Tallahassee that's supporting this initiative, or what could you speak to what you think the healthcare industry could be doing to help with reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, I don't know anything specifically in the healthcare field. I had been speaking to someone, I think Senator Berman had, mentioned this legislation as well, partly starting a pilot program, at public buildings like schools, fire stations, things like that, about trying a pilot program to install solar panel and, rely on solar energy and looking at things like that. So, I mean, if they have any ideas, or maybe Senator Berman knows of something specifically related to the healthcare industry.
I mean, the only thing I was going to say is that we do know that pollution does cause health impacts, cancer, asthma, other respiratory illnesses. So it is something, you don't always think about these things in that perspective, but it is, we got our moderator back. I say good, Ed. But it is something we need to be addressing, and we need to figure out, it's all interrelated, because, whatever we do on the healthcare side, will have an impact on our environment also. And, certainly reducing greenhouse gas emissions for everyone. Any building that can be carbon neutral, like I said, commercial properties now can put solar panels on. I've been looking into, legislation on that issue about how we can do it to make it more easier for companies to do. But I'd also like to see us do, some legislation that says, like other states have done, by X date, Florida needs to be carbon neutral. By X date, Florida needs to have 100% renewable energy. I think President Biden actually just said by 2050, he wants to see the United States be carbon neutral. So I think we need to continue, and the healthcare providers can be part of it for sure, helping us figure out how we're going to be meet those goals.
Great, thank you. And we have Ed back here, so thanks, Ed.
Sorry about that. A little
That's all
flare
right.
here, but all is well. So before we get to some of the other issues, I wanted to talk to you both about, and Senator Berman, you kind of brought it up earlier, when Governor DeSantis was talking about the $275 million in resilience projects that will be going forward. When asked, he kind of dismissed global warming as an issue that was more of an ideology issue than anything else. So I kind of wanted to get your opinion from both of you. Is separating the climate change issue from the issue of directly focusing on resiliency projects that we can feel and see, is separating those two items, is that kind of the more realistic pathway to address these issues? I mean, is that sort of the new effective political reality, or are they just inseparable? And Ms. Senator Berman, you brought it up, so I'll go with you first.
I have my opinion, and my opinion is that they are inseparable, because it costs much more to fix it up than it does on the front end. And I really believe that we should be fixing it on the front end. But I do know I lived as a representative for 8 years when we were prohibited from saying the words climate change. And it's unfortunate that words become so loaded, because we all agree that we don't want to have sea level rise, and we all agree that we don't want to have sunny day flooding, and we don't want to have inland flooding, and we want to make sure that our water quality stays pristine, and we all have to recognize that there are sources that are causing these problems, and we have to start addressing those problems. If it means not saying the words climate change and getting the end result, I'm okay with it. If we can change something that makes it so that people don't say, because unfortunately there are hot button words in our political discourse today, and in the whole everywhere throughout America. So if it means changing the hot button words and getting the same result, I'm okay with that. But I'm sorry that we're not discussing the sources as much as we should be.
So, Representative, is that going forward? I mean, is that going to be the new political norm? And is that the solution to getting continued funding?
I mean, look, I've said all the words. I've said climate change. I've said flooding. I've said sea level rise. What's the age-old saying? Actions speak louder than words. So, for me, I want the issue to get taken care of, and I think that we've seen strides this past year, and I'm excited for that. And that wouldn't have happened without the statewide leadership that we have. It wouldn't have happened without the leadership in the House, the leadership in the Senate, and the leadership in the governor's office. And I'm excited to continue to work on the issue, to continue to improve, to continue to always do more, to continue to always want more and want better for our state and our communities.
Representative, you grew up, I think you were born in Cape Coral, so they have different issues than we have over here, and people in Lake City have different issues in Lake City, and people in Panama City and Pensacola have different issues than us. So do you get a sense in both houses, in both bodies, do you get a sense of a collective realization of buy-in on this? Is that realization, is that tactile? Can you sense that from your other members at this point?
Yeah, and like you said, I grew up on the west coast of Florida, so there are different environmental issues, different water issues. But I think that it's across the board saying that, everyone cares about our state, about our environment. I grew up going to, the Everglades and doing airboat rides with my family, and that's one of my fondest memories. you know, and I think that you see it across Florida from the Panhandle down to, you know, Key West and throughout Monroe County, that we all care about protecting our state. And, you know, I'm excited to continue to work to do that. And that goes on both sides of the aisle.
Senator, do you get that sense in the Senate as well?
I do. You know, one of the biggest champions in the Senate that we've had for the last few years has been Senator Debbie Mayfield. And she represents the Indian River Lagoon area because they've had a lot of problems. And, you know, so she's not South Florida, and she's been, you know, like Representative Carrera said, there's been a lot of groundwork laid to get to where we have gotten to. And I would say Senator Mayfield did a lot of that groundwork. And so I feel like it is all over the state. It's, you know, I mean, we've seen algae blooms on the West Coast. The Panama area has had oil from oil spills. So everybody recognizes that we're all one catastrophe away from a huge problem. And so we need to work together to make sure that we shore everything up so that that one catastrophe doesn't happen in any of our communities. So I do really feel it's become much more of a bipartisan issue. And it's become a statewide issue with everybody, you know, giving their input. And yes, there are different priorities, and we are, you know, we have the springs, which have a tremendous amount of pollution in them, and we're addressing the springs, but we're also addressing the beaches, and we're also addressing canals, and we're, you know, so it's everything, and we need to work together for that reason, and that's why it's such a tremendous uphill pull to get all this done, because it is such a big area. But I do feel like it is a priority, and we are really starting to address it. And like you said, we went from like 1 to 5 in 1 year. It was pretty much on steroids to get to where we got to in 1 year. I mean, I remember we did a bill, Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez did a bill about if you're going to build in coastal areas, you have to get a review done before you're building in a coastal area. That was a huge victory at the time, because we were like, wow, this is great. It's an actual climate change bill that we're addressing. But that was such a teeny tiny part in comparison to what just happened in this resiliency bill. So we did go from 0 to 50, and hopefully now we'll go from 50 to 250, you know, so let's keep it up.
Well, I hope that's the case. And you know, looking where we are now from where we were 2 years ago, it is kind of an amazing trip. And I want to thank you both. So as we look to wrap up, and we'll look at some questions. Megan, if you want to have a question that might have come in the chat after I kind of wrap this one up. So when we look at the big picture going forward with the legislature, and Representative Posada-Cabello, you mentioned it, that we're going to have to do some other things, some tidying, some fixing. There's always more to do. So what are the next steps that Florida is going to have to take to protect our communities from the impacts of climate change? And Representative Posada-Cabello, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think, you know, the legislation that Senator Berman just mentioned that was carried by Senator Jose Javier Rodriguez in the Senate and by Representative Vance Lupus in the House was to do a study on, and I know that there was a question here about large developments in communities. It was to do a study on publicly funded construction that was on you know, in the coastline for the sea level rise impact of that development prior to construction. So maybe we need to look at legislation like that and expanding it and growing and going from there, because, you know, as we mentioned, this issue doesn't just affect coastal communities, it affects inland communities. You know, it's an issue that affects all Floridians. So I think that, you know, right now, because this is the first year that DEP was really looking at these resiliency projects, the first time that we've ever had to do a statewide assessment, we're going to find that there is a lot of improvement and a lot of growing that we can do to continue to do better and bring more funding back into our communities.
Senator Berman?
Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, we're going to continue to have infrastructure projects, and now, the good news is that there is a lot of money available through the federal government. And so I think we're going to just continue to see where the pressure points are, where the problem areas are, what we can do about it. We see Miami-Dade is doing things to raise roads. Every community is going to start, now that they know that there are funds available, they're going to start looking. I mean, I know the city of one of the cities in my Senate district is looking to build a new water tower with some of the money. So we're going to really see an examination, and we need to continue to examine to see where the best uses of those funds are, because it is, like I said, it's transformational, but we need to make sure we use the dollars well, and we need to make sure that they have a real impact. So I'm hopeful that we're going to see, we're going to have these real discussions on the community levels, and the regional levels, and then eventually on the statewide levels. But I'd like to hear from the community, the locals, our cities and our counties, what they suggest that we do.
Well, I'm going to kind of use this as the last question to wrap things up. So I know you both have resiliency related bills. Senator Berman, you kind of talked about yours, about kind of having energy goals. Representative Posada Cabrera, one of your bills is kind of to encourage the Water Management District to report on the Central and South Florida restudy. So I just kind of wanted to ask you both, what are some of the strongest measures that we might be able to expect from the 2022 legislative session?
That's a good question, and I brought the bill about having renewable energy portfolios for many years, and I'm not real encouraged that it's going to pass this year. But I do have another bill, for instance, that I'm hopeful will be passed, and that is having to do with safe waterways. Right now, we have a lot of impaired waterways in the state of Florida. And my bill simply says if the waterway is impaired, you need to put a sign up so that people don't go swimming, or if people are going to swim there, they should at least know that the waterway is impaired with whatever, a lot of times it's fecal bacteria and things like that. And I'm hopeful that bill will pass. So I think, we could see some movement on some of the continuing movement on the resiliency issue. But we'll see what happens, and we'll see how it all plays out as the legislative session goes on. But it's a hard issue to discuss the actual origins of the problem, but more we're addressing some of the impacts that we're seeing right now.
Representative?
Yes, and the bill that you mentioned that I'm working on with the regarding South Florida Water Management District is also Representative Bartleman's bill that I'm working with her on, and she is doing a great job and a great advocate for that issue. Like I've said before, I think what we may be looking at is kind of additional language related to the Always Ready Resiliency Flooding level rise plan. Like I said, this is the first time we've ever tackled this issue. It was we had a later session this year, and we have an early one coming up. So I would love to kind of see where we can continue to improve on that Always Ready flooding legislation.
Well, very good. Well, I want to thank you both for your time today and for your efforts, just not over the past year, in your case, Representative, but over the course of a decade or more, Senator Berman. Thank you for that. We look forward to I think we're hopeful about this issue going forward in the legislature, and we look forward to what's coming out, not just this year, but in the years to come. So thank you both so much for joining us today. And Megan, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, and to all for your hard work advancing legislation on climate resiliency issues and continuing to advocate for South Florida. Thank you so much for being here today. At 4:15, so in just 1 minute, we're going to have our last session of the day, Mobilizing Millions, Voices of Youth and Calls for Action. We're going to kick off that panel with remarks from Senator and NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, and then you're going to have just 10 or so students who are really exciting, passionate, intelligent people who are going to share their climate stories. So I'm sure We all don't want to miss that. And please click on that next session in your CVent portal. Once again, Senator, Representative Ed, thank you all so much.